This is Karen on NewClevelandRadio.net, and it is time for Heart Mojo with Melinda Smith. And Melinda, I am so glad that we are doing a second part of the last series because you are getting so many hits. You and Kim, people are listening, they're excited, and they want to hear more.
Thanks, thanks. Yeah, I think it's a timely topic right now for everybody, talking about grief and how do we move forward through all of the craziness that's gone on. So thank you. It's good to see you again. Thanks, Kim, for coming back for part two.
The pleasure is
You are
mine.
my first part two,
Oh
so
my
I'm
gosh, what an
excited.
honor.
Yep, yep. So we covered the first two sections of your book, Send My Roots Rain, which I normally would hold up, so pretend it's here,
Oh, here.
but I took it with me to actually be reading it in my, oh, there we go,
Ah,
yay. Reading it in between. So like when I'm running around doing things and suggested it for book club reading. So it was
Uh,
with me. So I
Melinda,
apologize for not
that's more
having it.
important to me than anything because this was such a labor of love, and there's so much grief and suffering right now that I really feel on fire to, tell people about the book and um, the notes I get. Makes it all worth it.
No, absolutely. So we did the first two parts. So I'm going to turn this over to you because we're going to move into part three.
Good. So, one of the things we want to talk about, although my book is mostly about grief around, anticipatory loss and ambiguous loss and actual death and caregiving, there are things in here about other losses. And I wanted to read a poem about one of those and then talk about how everything we've been saying about grief actually applies to job loss, loss of identity, um, if you've had to move out of a beloved home because your financial circumstances have changed, that's a big loss.
Hmm.
I don't know if I mentioned this last time, but pet loss is a
No,
huge
you didn't.
loss.
Hmm.
And, we really need to be more sympathetic to people when they lose their pets, and we certainly shouldn't be chiding them.
Absolutely.
So, this poem, which is a pretty well known one and one of my personal favorites, is called Those Winter Sundays, and it's by Robert Hayden. And in this, he's reflecting on his childhood. And it's a poem more about regret than loss, because I think regret and loss can, not necessarily, but they can be sisters. And that's not all bad, because when we know what we regret, then we do better in the future.
Hmm.
So here he's saying, Sundays too, my father got up early and put his clothes on in the blue black cold. Then, with cracked hands that ached from labor in the weekday weather, made banked fires burn. No one ever thanked him. I'd wake and hear the cold splintering, breaking, and when the rooms were warm, he'd call, and slowly I would rise and dress, fearing the chronic angers of that house, speaking indifferently to him who had driven out the cold and polished my good shoes as well. What did I know? What did I know of love's austere and lonely offices? So here we have a son. This is written by an African American poet who was fostered as a child, part of his childhood. I don't know a lot about his life, but when I did research it, I found out that some of the chronic angers in the house were from his mother. It wasn't his father. His father was the more, first, a foster father was the more nurturing one. And I love how probably decades later he's writing this poem, wishing he had thanked that man. And I bet we can all,
Hmm.
right, think of a
Right.
mentor or a relative who we couldn't possibly appreciate when we were young. Sometimes we don't appreciate the person until they're gone. That's why I
Right.
say that regret and loss can be sisters. Um, it's just very lovely. I wrote in the reflection, in those winter Sundays, we witness the moment when the grown up child grapples with gratitude left unexpressed for a father's love unrecognized. As a child, the chronic angers of the house, whoever generated them, were paramount in awareness. But as an adult, the poet uncovers a fresh perspective. And I actually find that very hopeful, because if those words, "What did I know," kind of pierce your heart, good. Then you're alive. Then you can,
Hmm.
do something different. So that was part of what motivated me. Another quick thing that I want to mention is there's a poem in here called Gabriel, a Poem. And this is written by Edward Hirsch about his son who was probably not neurotypical. I don't know in exactly what ways, but he had some behavior issues from an early age and didn't always fit in and so on. And then he died from an overdose when he was young. And this was despite, if anyone is listening who's lost someone to drugs, you know that most people move heaven and earth to get their loved one into recovery. And Edward Hirsch was no different. They had a million interventions for this boy, and you know, it they still couldn't keep him from,
Sure.
his death. And so here we have a loss of like what we expected, which I think a lot of people are experiencing during the pandemic. We expected, if you look at your calendar from last year, if it extended into this year, you're taking off vacations, you're taking off family reunions, you're taking
Hmm.
off visits to places you thought you were going to see. And so, we had these expectations about life, what life's going to be like. And even apart from the pandemic, that's not always what happens. And so when you have a child, you imagine a certain son in 20
Right.
years. And so one of the things he says here is, I did not know the work of mourning, mourning, mourning is a labor in the dark we carry inside ourselves. Though sometimes when I sleep, I am with him again, and then I wake. Poor Sisyphus grief, I am not ready for your heaviness cemented to my body. Sisyphus is that Greek character who rolls the stone up the hill, and then his punishment is that it rolls back down, and then he pushes
Hmm.
it back up and rolls back down. And I love that image, Sisyphus grief. Again, not to be fatalistic. It's not that I don't believe in saying I'll never get over it, because that's like saying I will never nothing new will ever come to me, or I will never grow, or I won't learn anything from this experience. And most people who are trying to live a reflective life do learn lots of things from their bad experiences.
Sure.
So it's not a hopeless thing like Sisyphus, but when you're in the midst of it, you do feel like you're rolling a stone up the hill. And I think a lot of people have hit that wall with the pandemic right now,
Hmm.
right? I know my family and I keep saying, gee, we just have to suck it up for a little bit longer.
Well, and they
End
do
is inside.
keep telling you that it's another couple of weeks. It's
I
another
know.
couple of weeks. And I think that, the world as a whole, instead of making you more depressed by going, this is going to go on for
Yeah.
6 to 8 months or a year, get used to it. They
Mm-hmm.
do this 2 week intervals, if we do this for a month, if we do this, oh, when the shot gets here, we start the
Right.
next. And there is hope with that,
Yes.
but there's still this other side. So
Right.
you have a little bit of hope that helps relieve the grief of
Right.
being stuck into this new world, right?
Right.
And
Right.
then you go back, right? It's still 2 more weeks, or oh, now there's a variant strain,
Oh,
and we don't know if this is going to work.
I know. No
I
kidding.
think that we're constantly throwing onto people one more thing, to the point where some people just break.
Well,
And,
and there's no doubt that everyone feels overloaded. And I have such sympathy for people who already, had mental health issues, no fault of their own. They're
mhm,
doing what they can. They're seeing their counselor, they're taking their medicine, but they suffer from anxiety or depression or, and this is really such a strain on them. I don't know. I'm sure some of your readers are people who pray. I'm sure some of your readers are people who cultivate an intention or
mhm,
meditate, like
mhm.
breathe in suffering, breathe out ease and comfort. But I feel like any of us who have some empathy, need to spend a little time doing whatever is right for us, for those
Right.
who are fragile right now.
But even with giving someone those tools, breathe in and breathe out and meditation and relaxation, we may do that outwardly, but there's still that internal battle going
Oh
on,
yeah.
and it's adding to whatever other issues you may have. If you have other anxiety issues that bring on Crohn's or,
Right,
irritable bowel or
right,
migraines or any of those other things, this just makes that worse. I mean,
right.
outwardly, I do it myself. I'm one of those people who I always speak positive for the most part,
Yes.
but inside, I have to fight the voice.
Of course you do. That's welcome to humanity, right? I mean, I teach resilience skills for over 20 years now. And I talked to you last time about how when my own parents died, I circled the drain. I was under a quilt for 5 days. But you know what was helpful? One of the hospital chaplains said to me, "What do you expect from yourself? You've been taking care of them off and on for years. Do you think you're not human like everyone else?" And that was a really good like slap. She was kind
Hmm.
when she said it, but a good slap in the face. What do we expect of ourselves, Melinda, right? Of
Right.
course we're going
Well,
to hear that voice that we have to
Like,
talk back to.
some of it comes from when you're younger, I think. It depends on the person, of course, but as a child, I had a lot of responsibility coming from an alcoholic side of the family, my
Yes.
job to protect my brother, to make sure that everything was okay. And then as you get older, that's always my job, right?
Yes, I
That
get
was
that.
my job. And it didn't matter if I had something else to do. This was
Right,
my job. This was my priority. And I
right.
think when you get into this type of world, it's very
That
hard to
gets
hold yourself to that standard.
Well, that gets triggered, like all that old stuff. You know how they say every grief triggers every other grief?
Hmm.
So, the research shows that somebody's cat dies and they're just sobbing for weeks. And then finally it comes to them, or maybe a grief counselor helps them see that it's because when their husband died, they were so busy raising the kids by themselves that they never really got to grieve it. And
They
so
didn't
this
grieve.
cat, and I think the same thing happens. I keep being amazed at how many things we have in common. I was also a parentified child, and I knew my job, and
Hmm.
I'm deeply formed in a kind of perfectionism to make everybody happy.
Hmm.
And I hear that voice all the time. And has it gotten a little louder since the pandemic? Mm-hmm. But fortunately, I'm old enough now that I hear it, and not every day, there's some days when maybe it gets better of me for an hour or a day, but I also have learned how to not trust my own brain and recognize that sometimes it's making stuff up to
Hmm.
to keep me scared. And one of my mentors said, when you hear that voice cawing in your ear, "You can't do that. Who do you think you are?" She said, envision it like some big crow or raven, and just go like this and like
That's
brush it
right.
off your
yep.
shoulder and watch it fly.
Don't you think that
So
the
useful.
pandemic has given a lot of people, I don't want to use the word excuse, but that's the easiest one I can use, okay?
Yes.
To take things and blow them even more out of proportion.
Yeah.
And I'm seeing this, especially amongst young people,
Hmm.
because here they were on the path to get a job, get a promotion, graduate college, do all these things that we're supposed to be doing at
Right.
certain ages,
And they did
and
it.
and they're stuck now. Okay.
Right.
Um, and I'm seeing a lot of older people as well saying, wait a second, like I don't know how many more years I have left,
Right.
but I want to enjoy it, but I'm sort of stuck inside right now. And I
Right.
heard that recently from my brother out in California. And he said, I'm 78 years old. I don't
Yeah.
want to sit in my condo 24/7, but
Right.
it's not safe to go outside.
I mean,
And
your heart
yeah,
breaks, right?
it does.
It's a
Because,
very big challenge for people who are older or younger,
yes,
Right.
and it's really a tremendous test in a way. I don't think anybody sent it to us as a test, but it feels like a test. And my prayer all the time is that something valuable comes out of all this suffering.
The
Exactly.
problem is it feels like a never ending test. I
Yeah.
think if, like I
It does
said
right
before,
now. Yeah.
when it's 2 more weeks, another month, 2 more weeks, I think when we all started, I remember saying this to friends of March, oh, we're going to shut down for a couple of weeks.
Right.
It'll blow over and
We
then
were
we'll go back to our
so
life, right?
naive. We were so naive.
We were. And I think the problem is it's a never ending test. And in life, I mean, yeah, some of us feel like we constantly get tested. And my
Yeah,
last 7 years have been a whole lot of testing. But this is across the board for everybody.
it is.
And you don't want to fail the test, right, Karen, by going out because you just can't take it anymore.
Exactly.
Right. I mean, could
And
literally be a fatal mistake. So
Right.
it
it
hangs
could be,
heavy. It
but
hangs,
then you come across, like she mentioned, he's 78. Those of us who work in the senior care industry, we have these seniors who are just petrified. They're in fear.
yeah,
They haven't been out since March. Literally have not been out of their home, out the front door in the sunshine, the fresh air
right.
since March.
Oh,
Then you have some seniors who's, you know what? I'm 85 or 90. If I
whatever.
die, I die. Something's going to take me out.
Right.
The problem is their life and their thoughts don't always go with the other people if they live in the same community, whether it's
Right.
independent living or an assisted living. And that makes it really hard. Your choices are gone and they grieve for those choices too.
Yep.
They
Yes,
don't have
that's
options. Somebody's taking that away. And as you get older, you're losing so many things. Maybe you can't drive. Maybe you can't
right.
walk the same. Maybe you can't eat the same foods. So many things you're losing. And now to lose that little piece of
I
your
understand.
decision is just
It's like
terrible for them.
it's like the last straw for some people,
Hmm.
Right.
you know. And yet, one of the things, well, one day I was very blue and my daughter said to me, Mom, I recognize this. This is a cognitive bias. Is it so wonderful when your kids are smarter than you are, This is a cognitive bias, and it's a typical cognitive bias because your brain falls into this rut that says, I'm always going to feel like this and it's unbearable. And so she said, one of the reasons you picked up the phone and called me is because some healthy part of you knew that I was going to say to you, Mom, you won't always feel like this because this won't last forever. It's certainly lasting longer than any of us would like.
Hmm.
But you know what? So did the world wars that people lived with.
Right.
So did the pandemic in 1918. Look how long the depression, when the stock market crashed and people lost everything and they were lining up for soup and bread in the streets. Look how long that took to recover from. And yet they did. If you look at the people that we admire the most of them are people who suffered.
Right.
Right.
Right? And I mean, Nelson Mandela in prison for 21 years. That would have made me, I think, a little bitter.
Yeah.
I
He
think
comes
so.
out, he's like a mystic. He's ready to lead his country into throwing off apartheid in a revolution that no one ever thought could be bloodless, and it mostly was.
Hmm.
So these are the things I tell myself when I get very low, not to be toxically positive. I think I've admitted enough that I have to argue with the voice in the head too. But one other thing that this reminds me of, may I?
Sure. Absolutely.
So there's a poem that I read even before, I wrote this book. It's not specifically about grief, but what am I trying to say? Part of what I'm experiencing as a spiritual person is that sense that, I'm desperate to kind of get parts of my old life back. But I'm also really thinking about what parts of my old life I don't want to have back.
Hmm.
And I'm recognizing that I've grown so much in mindfulness, in gratitude. I said to my husband the other day, like, it's the little things, isn't it? It's just the little things. I made a cup of tea that's more expensive than the tea I usually buy, called Golden Monkey. Isn't that a great name for a tea?
Hmm.
And I was like ecstatic over the first sip. And when I had a busier pace, I don't know if I would have. So I'm going to share with you a poem by Mark Nebo. I'm sure some of your listeners know him, and
Hmm.
he's a cancer survivor, and he's been through some other hard times too. It's short, but it's part of what I'm trying to capture. He'll say it way more elegantly than I. So this is called Adrift by Mark Nebo. Listen to this first line. Everything is beautiful, and I am so sad. This is how the heart makes a duet of wonder and grief. The light spraying through the lace of the fern is as delicate as the fibers of memory, forming their web around the knot in my throat. The breeze makes the birds move from branch to branch, as this ache makes me look for those I've lost in the next room, in the next song, in the laugh of the next stranger. In the very center, under all of it, what we have that no one can take away and all that we've lost face each other. It is there that I am adrift, feeling punctured by a holiness that exists inside everything. I am so sad, and everything is beautiful. So, like, do you see what I'm trying to say? There's like an exquisiteness about the bittersweetness that is
Mhm.
life right now. And that line, this is how the heart makes a duet of wonder and grief. I just keep carrying that through these days. Like, this is my task right now, my kind of growth task or my spiritual task, to let my heart be soft enough and open enough to make a duet of wonder and grief. Because that's what life is right now.
It it certainly is, and how appropriate for Valentine's Day coming up.
Yeah.
And I'm not making a joke out of that. I think
No,
a
you're
lot
right.
of people don't give their heart because of that. They're worried about that balance of grief, of losing. You don't want to give your heart, you don't want to love somebody too much, because if they leave you for any reason,
Right.
it's hard to deal with that grief. But it's the understanding of the loss that makes the other piece richer, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. I I think it's Parker Palmer who talks about the open broken heart. He says you can have like a broken heart or you can have an open broken heart so that your grief enlarges you ultimately. Now, nobody gets up in the morning and says, "Boy, I hope, the caca really hits the fan today because I'd love to love to grow some character, have my heart broken." I mean, I don't do that either. But if you live long enough, grief
Your
will
heart
come to
gets
you.
broken,
It does.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
whether
And
it's
and what's the
losing,
alternative, right?
never
To go
having,
through life all shuttered up.
right. Better to have loved and lost than never loved at all, isn't that the
I think there's no truer words. And yet it takes courage. I mean, it's a risk, no doubt about it.
well, everything we do in life is a risk. The problem is you have now, and I think with the generation that's a little bit younger than we are, you mentioned about the hard times of coming through, the World War and depression, and we have a generation, a very large generation or two, that has no clue about that
They
kind of
haven't
life.
had a
Right.
very hard life up until now. Well, some of
Exactly.
them. I mean, let's face it, I'm a white suburban lady. So I can say, oh, yeah, these young people haven't suffered much, but some of them have. Some of them
Well,
have
I'm
grown
not
up in
even thinking
poverty and
about that. I'm
so on.
thinking about what's given to them. Take the
Stuff,
white
you mean?
suburban child, right?
Hmm.
Let's just take that. There are many children who everything has been handed to them. They haven't
Yes.
had to work. I mean, I worked 3 jobs. I started working at 12 years old. Did
Hmm.
I want to ride my bike with the Cleveland Press on each shoulder, my up and down the street, and get picked on by the boys for being the
Right.
first paper girl? No, but I needed the money. It was my
Right.
job. Okay. I
Right.
didn't hate it. My point is you have a generation that's finding it harder to even deal with this. We would have thought as boomers that they would have ate this up, so to speak, because they could be on the computer, they could do the Zoom, and they were
Yes.
all on their phones doing those things all the time, right?
Yes.
But I believe what I'm seeing with my son's friends, it's actually harder,
It's
because
very hard
even though
on
they
them.
were online, they don't have the same skill set
Hmm.
to survive or to deal. Now they're surviving, most of
Yeah.
them, because suicide's up in young people,
I know.
young people and older people, but they don't have the same skill set. It's something we missed, and maybe this is the way for it to return in the last
I hope so.
20
I hope
years.
you're right. Although I will say I don't disagree with you, and I can't imagine what I would be doing now in terms of coping if I was 23 and living through a pandemic. I mean, I hope I have some wisdom now, hard earned, but when I was 23, I was like dumb as a rock. What did I know about? I didn't know I mean, I look at my own kids and I think, boy, they're so much further ahead than I was when I was their age, because that's the upside, the
Right.
opposite of what you're saying. Actually, probably what I'm saying is true, and what you're saying is also true. It just depends on who it is. But I'm really grateful I'm not going through this at a time when I have little kids at home, for example.
Well, or even having children, because the other thing that I've been hearing is you have now a generation that's like saying, "Well, you know what? I don't think I want to bring kids into this
Right.
world." Not just because of the pandemic fear, but everything else and all the unrest in our country.
Global warming.
Whereas if you went back 50, 60, oh my God, 70, 80 years, they had hope. They
Yeah.
had a little more hope. And so they had children so that we could create a better world
That's a
versus,
very interesting point, Melinda. Because I've had those conversations with some younger folk on my Zoom workshops and so on. And I think, boy, I wonder if I'd be asking that question now if I was living through this. But there's also that need to have hope that whoever you bring into the world will make it a better place.
and maybe that one child makes the difference. You don't know.
You
But
don't.
it's that belief system. And I just feel, I'm not trying to be negative. I just feel like there's a piece of that lacking.
Mm-hmm.
And the fear, they're letting that fear that the world is just never going to be a better place
Mm-hmm.
replace, the idea of having hope that, your child may make the difference,
Right.
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So,
It's a struggle because I do, I think I mentioned I do a workshop called Generations in the Workplace, and I
you
love
did.
doing that because it gets us all talking to each other. And one of the things I see in the younger generation is they are more aware of racism, of climate
Hmm.
problems. They're so much more aware than I was at that age. That's the good news. Like they want to do something about it. The bad news is they carry a lot of that on their backs like a burden,
Hmm.
and
Yes.
it gets overwhelming. But
I
I
think,
do have hope that they're learning things. Like, here's an example. My son is 30. He said to me, this kind of helplessness that we feel now when we don't want to um, risk, going out and so on. He said, this is what some families who live in poverty or who live in a dangerous neighborhood or who there's a gang in their neighborhood. This is what they live with all the time.
every day.
Yep.
Yeah. And I was like, what a wonderful and empathetic insight that is.
Hmm.
And
Absolutely.
like the political unrest, it's so painful. And yet there are countries who people's whole lifetimes they've had a
Well,
dictator, in charge. It's
and they come in and murder them, or they take out whole
right.
sections. Yeah.
It's a nightmare. They have no freedom of speech. We can't even imagine what that's like. We're just getting a taste of what that's like. So my prayer all the time is that this will open our hearts and make us more empathetic and to each other and to people around the world, even because we only know what we know. And I think this pandemic is helping us to learn what we don't know.
Yeah.
I didn't know what I didn't know, and now I'm starting to see what I didn't know.
Or we need to actually go back and bring back those things that were important. Because being a child that came through the 60s and 70s, right? When everything was about free love and love each other, and we talked about the climate and we talked about organic foods. We did all of those things.
Yes,
And then something happened
yes.
and we went a whole different direction. So I feel like maybe this is a little bit of a turnaround to go back to see, because we talked
Mhm.
about those same issues.
We did, and we were going to change the world and make
Hmm.
it a great place. And now we have maybe a little correction.
A
Correction,
course correction,
right?
a little bit differently.
Little
It's always
differently.
that fork in the road. So you know what? It's up to us to also let the younger generation know that they are of value. And I
Mhm.
think a
Yes.
lot of them right now are feeling that they have no value. Mom and dad can tell them they're great people, but it's not just mom and dad, it's
Yeah.
everybody else around. We have to acknowledge each other. And until we really, start doing that, our youth are, they're going to flounder because they don't feel like they have the skills to move ahead. A lot of them have gone to college and have gotten degrees that they may never use because
Yeah.
what they went to college for 5, 10 years ago, those jobs just aren't available.
Right.
Yeah, so much of this is societal. It's not, I mean, for example, look at the millennials and how absolutely cruel people have been to millennials.
I
I mean,
know.
there must be 20 negative things said about millennials to every one positive. What was that all about? Like, what was the need? Is our self-esteem so small that we need to heap, criticism on people younger than us? And in healthcare, they call that eating your young. Have you heard this expression? It's
Yeah.
pretty apt, isn't it? Because, sometimes and it was an older nurse who told me this. Sometimes the older nurses, are a little resentful of the opportunities or the energy of the younger ones. And so they can be kind of judgmental or picky, and that's terrible for team spirit, and it's ultimately not good for the workers or the patients. And the nickname that's been given is that nurses eat their young, and I'm sure nurses aren't the only ones who eat their young. I think
Well,
we did it as a society, and that's not helpful.
I think it's our society view that when you get old, you're not worth anything. And
Mhm.
so we have a huge number of boomers who are aging and really mad about it.
Yeah.
So it's really easy to pick on younger people and say, well, you're not doing this and you're not doing that, and I still have value. And that is a societal issue that we don't value each group for what they have and what they're able to give to our world. I mean,
Right.
I have, my own kids. I mean, it's one of those things where, they know everything and mom knows nothing. And they forget that, I did raise you. So I
Yeah.
do have some, and you're a good person and you're a
Yeah.
smart person. So I must have done something that was good,
Right.
right? So
Right.
I think that's part of it. I think it's, again, the grieving process of the loss of youth
Mhm.
that we have in a whole big generation.
Mhm.
I mean, we're
That's a
the
very
largest
interesting
generation.
point. I'll be thinking about that for a couple days, I think. Generational grieving. And I had a mentor. She just passed away right before the pandemic. She was in 85. And I said to her one time, Franny, she was like a second mother to me. I said, Franny, what's the hardest part of getting older? And she went like this. And I said, your face. And she said, yeah, because I can't help looking 85. And so everyone judges me by it. And I was like, whoa, yeah, there's a burden, it's not
Hmm.
unlike, racism or sexism or, I think it's why it's good that we finally coined the term ageism, but maybe we need youthism too, because you get judged by that as
Right.
well,
You do.
Well, you
right?
get judged through your whole life. And I think once we sort of understand that, maybe we can stop all the judgment that
Mm.
is out there. Um, you know, some people look older than they are, some people look younger than they are.
Yeah.
So we don't know what that number is, and the number should have no effect on what we do with ourselves. And I'm sure you see a lot of this, Melinda, in your field, that
Hmm.
there are a
Mm.
lot of people out there, you know, whose families have suggested and moved them to assisted living
Hmm.
because daughters and sons think that mom and dad are not capable anymore. And sometimes it's way too soon. So,
Mhm.
Right. Right. And it's really one of those things where you start living, so you have children. It's a sandwich generation, right? You have your children and you have your parents and you want to help them, but
Yeah.
where do I fit into the picture? And so
Right.
then it makes that group whole generation look selfish,
right.
right? Because they're like, well, what about me? But then you don't want to be selfless all the time. I mean, it's really
It's a very difficult
it, It is, and people
position
used
to
to
be in.
live together in their homes, right? So you had
Amen.
everybody together. Mom and dad moved in with you when they got older, and your children learned to respect and learn to care about their grandparents or their
Yes.
aunt and uncle who were older. We don't have any of that. We have a very broken family unit today. There are very few units that work together. And I think that's a big piece of this too. And the pandemic has just made that more apparent, right?
Worse.
Because even
Mhm.
those twice a year you might have seen your parents or they might have seen their grandchildren, they don't even have that.
Right. And that's a loss. Talk about a loss. Even before the pandemic, the loss of extended family around you. You know, I actually know, on a hopeful note though, I know two families who pooled their resources, the parents and the adult children, and built a home big enough to accommodate all of them
Hmm.
so that they have space like an in-law suite that's not just a cubby hole, it's actually very
Right.
nice, but it's all connected, so they share the kitchen, for example. And then so there you have three generations living together. And I'm sure some people are thinking, not my parents, that would be a fate worse than death. But I do think we were built, all things being equal, mental health being intact and there being some love there and so on. I do think we were kind of meant to live intergenerationally, because grandparents caring for kids is part of what keeps them sharp.
Right. It keeps them sharp. It also teaches empathy and sympathy to younger people seeing what they can't do. It also has them learn where they came from. Because if you
Yes,
don't know where you came from, you don't really understand how you're moving forward and where you're going. That's always been
agreed.
my belief. Like, I know where I came from and it's made me who I am. And the
Yes,
stories that my grandparents told me, I can tell my children.
yes,
We lose that. And
yes.
then we're just floundering out in the world, right? We're like the lost fish at
Well,
sea.
everyone's so lonely. And if when we had extended family around us, okay, maybe Uncle Joe was not the easiest guy to be around, but his wife, Aunt Betty, was lovely. So if I needed somebody to talk to, I might get Aunt Betty off to her self-help or pull weeds in the backyard, and she might, give me some sage advice.
Right.
And so you
Absolutely.
took the good with the bad. Every family had a character. Every family knew who their character was, but there was this feeling like, yeah, he's really a piece of work, but he's
Right.
ours,
He's, yeah.
and I think that was good for us.
And it gives
So,
you stories later to laugh about,
oh,
actually. I mean,
for
my
sure.
my grandma moved in with us and my mom for a year, and my grandmother had Alzheimer's.
Hmm.
And I had a 3-year-old and a 6-year-old.
Oh boy.
So she moved in, and the 3-year-old mentally was about the same level as his great grandmother.
Right.
And they got along great.
That's wonderful.
And she would do all sorts of these just little things that, like trip you when you walk by or scream or pinch a guy in the grocery store on the tush,
Oh
a
my
young guy.
gosh.
My mother was horrified, but today we laugh about those
Yeah.
things and
Right.
they become fond memories.
Yes.
Yes.
I was never horrified. Actually, it was kind of funny when she'd pinch somebody, but not
Yeah.
tripping me in my house was not fun. But
Right.
I just think that we've lost that. And when you're grieving, those are the things that get you through
Yes.
that loss. If
Yes.
you lose a family member and you have no really good fun stories or memories,
Yeah.
you've really lost
It's
a lot.
sad. Hmm. Well,
Kim,
part of what I think, oh, I'm sorry, Karen, you go first.
you've shared a lot with us today, but we still haven't gotten to the end of your book yet.
I
Oh,
think there's going to be a part 3.
I think we need to do a part 3.
well, I would be delighted to, because part of what I've been thinking is, I teach resilience skills for a living. This is really the time for that. And maybe we could talk about the last part of the book and, so, some actual, like what the research tells us about how to keep ourselves on our feet during a hard time like this.
Right.
I think
Right.
I think that would be great.
If you're okay with coming back, the time just flies when we're
It
talking.
This is a complete pleasure to me. I mean, first of all, to meet kindred spirits who are trying to make the world a better place, that's an honor. And then, like, to explore these ideas that are so interesting and compelling, and then laugh at ourselves while we do
Right.
it. Money can't buy that.
No. So I think, is there anything you want to end with? Obviously, we're not doing part 4, so you're going to save that for next
No.
time. So is there anything that you would like to end with for today? And then we'll see if we can maybe adjust and in 2 weeks have you come back so we can do our series.
I think I would like to end with an appreciation of the many, many people out there who have been fighting the good fight. And sometimes that's, like a healthcare worker or an essential worker. And sometimes it's just all those people who made up those creative memes of Bernie with his
Oh,
mitt,
that was hysterical. But
which
he's
were,
turned those and he's making money and giving it to food banks and things like that. It's amazing.
I heard that. So not only have we benefited from the unselfish creativity of all these minds, I would never think that put Bernie in his chair hanging upside down with a group of bats. Did you see that one? It was hilarious. And I thought, what kind of a mind looks at this picture and thinks of this? So I think I'd like to end by saying, let's approach till we're together again in 2 weeks. Let's approach our lives with a spirit of kind of, grateful wonder. Like, yeah, it's a mess. I mean, we're living in a mess, but we also have the skills to make a duet of grief and wonder. And it's a good way to live. So I
And
think
going
that's what
into Valentine's Day, we have to understand the balance in the heart and be
Right.
open to that, whether it's with a relationship or the other things that are going on in your life, to know that you need both to be balanced, truly to be balanced.
Absolutely.
It's not this or that, it's this and that.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again. I'm looking
A
forward to
pleasure.
another
Me
conversation.
too. I'm very honored. Holy cow.
Boy, you're going to be, you not only are you my first part 2, you're going to be my first part 3.
Thank
love
you. Melinda and Karen, you are so easy to talk to. I feel like I've known you for years. I feel like we just need a teacup,
Well,
teacup.
as soon as we can, we'll actually do something in person.
I would
I
love
would love that. Let's make it a promise.
Have a
Okay.
great day,
All right.
everybody.
Thank you.
Take
Bye-bye.
care, everyone.